He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just sat there, in the snow, every single night. No collar. No name. No owner in sight. Just a quiet pit bull. Staring at the back door of a small-town clinic, most people passed him by. Boton night shift nurse stopped and opened the door. Nak nen dan kao trauni. What she discovered next would uncover a hidden promise, a forgotten hero, and a bond so powerful it brought an entire veteran sinner to tears. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more true, heart-touching stories like this one. In the remote mountain town of Pine Hollow, Oregon, where winter wrapped the streets in a blanket of silence and snow fell like time itself had slowed, something unusual began to stir just as the town was going to sleep. The kind of unusual that doesn't shout for attention, but whispers, patiently waiting to be seen. It started, as many stories do, in the quiet hours when most lights have dimmed and only the hum of a distant street lamp remains. Emily Dawson, a night shift nurse at the Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic, was locking up after another long, unremarkable Tuesday. It was just past 2 in the morning when she stepped out into the frigid night. The cold bit into her cheeks as she zipped up her parka and turned toward the lot where her old Subaru was waiting, engine still warm. That's when she saw him for the first time. He was sitting still as stone on the snow-covered sidewalk just outside the clinic doors, a black Pitbull, broad-shouldered, muscular, but clearly weathered by the cold. His ears were alert, his posture rigid but not aggressive. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared at the entrance, as if waiting for someone to walk through it. As if expecting something. Or someone. Emily paused, one hand on her keys, heart tugged by the sight. The snow had gathered on his back like he hadn't moved in hours. His coat was frosted, his eyes unblinking, glowing faintly in the dim yellow wash of the clinic's security lights. He looked like a statue, carved from night and sorrow. She took a cautious step, closer. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, half joking and half concerned. "You lost?" The dog didn't flinch. He didn't acknowledge her voice or presence, just kept his eyes fixed on the door, like a sentinel at post. She tilted her head. His collar was missing, and though he was no longer young, he wasn't old either. There was something noble in the way he sat, not like a stray seeking food, but more like a soldier waiting for orders. Emily hesitated, but the cold eventually pushed her onward. She walked past him slowly, eyes still on him, and opened her car door. As she pulled away, the image of him sitting there against the soft swirl of falling snow lodged itself in her mind. Maybe he belonged to one of the nearby cabins, she reasoned. Maybe he'd wandered from home, but he was there again the next night. Same spot, same posture, same silence. And then again the night after that. By the fourth night, Emily couldn't ignore him anymore. She stopped before even reaching her car, walking directly over to him with a paper napkin-wrapped sandwich she hadn't eaten during her shift. "If you're going to be out here every night," she murmured, crouching slowly, "you might as well have something in your belly." This time, he glanced at her. Just once. A slow blink. Then his eyes returned to the door. He didn't touch the food. Emily left it anyway. The following morning, the sandwich was gone, and there were paw prints leading away down the sidewalk. By now, the staff had begun to take notice. A few of the techs joked that the clinic had gained a guardian. Others were more cautious, suggesting animal control. But Emily, perhaps out of instinct, or empathy, or something she couldn't quite name, told them to leave him be. "He's not dangerous," she said firmly. "He's waiting. For what?" one asked. Emily had no answer, only a feeling, and a growing ache in her chest that reminded her of a time, not long ago, when she'd waited for someone who never came back. Each night, as she exited the clinic into the hush of snow and stars, she found herself drawn to him. She started bringing blankets, then water. Then she set up a plastic bin lined with old towels beneath the overhang, where the wind wouldn't bite so harshly. The pit bull whom she had taken to calling Buddy, because the name had just slipped out one night and felt right, remained stoic, distant, but never hostile. He never entered the bin, but he didn't leave either. Not until morning. The contrast was haunting. The wide blanket of untouched snow, the cold yellow halo of the overhead light, and that single shape curled in the shadows like a forgotten piece of someone's heart. Emily began to notice things. Buddy always looked at the same door, the rear emergency entrance. He never paid attention to the front lobby, where most pets came and went. Only that one back door, the one used when patients were admitted in serious condition or when they were wheeled out under white sheets in the quietest hours of the morning. The realization sent a chill deeper than the wind. She started wondering, had someone he loved walked through that door and never come back? Maybe Buddy wasn't lost at all. Maybe he was exactly where he needed to be. Maybe he was keeping a promise. On the 7th night, Emily stayed behind after her shift ended. She made herself a cup of tea and sat quietly in the break room with the lights dimmed, watching him from the window. He never glanced around. He never lay fully down to rest. He simply sat, alert, quiet, watching, like a memory refusing to fade, like a love that didn't know how to let go. She found herself whispering, "Who are you waiting for?" Outside, Buddy blinked, ears flicking toward the sound. But his eyes never left that door, and neither, she realized, would he until something changed, or someone helped him understand that it was time. By the 2nd week, Buddy had become part of Emily's nightly routine. She never said it aloud, but some part of her now expected him. Every night, right there in the snow, in that same quiet spot by the emergency entrance of the clinic, he sat watchful, silent, as though listening for something only he could hear. At first she left food in cautious offerings, bowls of warm broth, bits of leftover chicken, softened dog biscuits. Not once did he growl or bark. He kept his distance, always polite in a way that felt almost human. He would sniff the food carefully, eat without urgency, then return to his post, as if his hunger was a secondary matter, a chore to complete, before resuming his watch. One night, she found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor inside the lobby, just beyond the glass door, a mug of coffee in hand, watching him as he watched the snow. The snow fell hard that night, thick curtains of white sweeping the streets, and yet Buddy didn't budge. His fur was dusted with frost, but he never shivered, never turned his head, just that quiet posture, shoulders squared, gaze locked on the door like it might open at any moment. She found herself whispering again, "Why here, boy?" No answer, of course. But there was something about his eyes, those deep amber eyes, that gave her pause. They didn't look like the eyes of a stray. They weren't fearful or confused. They weren't even hopeful. They were patient. Eyes like that don't belong to a lost dog, she thought. They belong to a dog who's waiting for someone. That night, the wind turned violent. Temperatures dropped fast, 10 degrees in under an hour. A blizzard warning came through on her phone. Emily paced back and forth inside the clinic, glancing toward the door, torn between logic and instinct. Logic said, "You can't let a stray animal in. It could be dangerous. It could have something, disease, trauma." But instinct whispered something else entirely. So, just before midnight, she bundled herself up, stepped outside into the screaming wind, and knelt near Buddy with a blanket in one hand and her other outstretched. "Come inside," she said gently, barely audible over the storm. "You'll freeze out here." He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes met hers and held, and for the first time, he stood and took a step forward. He followed her in without hesitation. No growl, no resistance. He walked beside her down the hallway and into the small waiting room she'd prepared, quiet, heated, dimly lit with a soft floor rug and a folded blanket near the radiator. But what happened next made Emily freeze in place. Instead of curling up near the heat or exploring like a curious animal might, Buddy walked slowly across the room and laid down in the exact corner where a patient named Hank Reynolds had spent the last nights of his life just 3 weeks earlier. The moment was too specific, too direct. It couldn't be a coincidence. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had worked Hank's case. A kind man in his late 60s, terminal cancer, no family nearby. He'd been admitted with severe pain, stabilized, then transferred to palliative care. He hadn't said much in his final days, but she remembered his soft-spoken warmth and the way he'd always looked toward the door like someone was supposed to come. But no one ever did. Emily slowly sat down on the floor nearby, studying Buddy in the low light. He was curled up now, his broad body forming a half-moon shape, head resting gently on his paws. His eyes remained open, however staring not at her, but at the wall across the room. The same wall Hank had stared at, night after night, as if waiting for something to walk through it. "Did you know him?" she whispered, barely able to speak the words. "Were you his—" Buddy didn't move, but his ear twitched at the sound of her voice, and his tail gave one slow thump against the floor. One single acknowledgement. A chill went down her spine, not from cold, but from the aching familiarity that filled the room. She stayed with him for nearly an hour, watching as his breathing slowed and deepened. When she finally stood to leave, Buddy lifted his head and watched her go. That same quiet look, that same calm intensity. As if, in some quiet corner of his heart, he'd recognized her kindness, but was still loyal to someone else. The next morning, as snow piled against the doorways, and the town remained frozen in silence, Emily scrolled through patient records at her desk, her coffee untouched. She pulled up Hank Reynolds' file and read through his notes again. 71 years old, pancreatic cancer, former firefighter. Under personal notes, no next of kin. Has a dog, will try to arrange temporary care. Patient requests room facing back lot. She frowned at that last line. Room facing the back lot. That was the same entrance Buddy had sat outside. The same door Hank had been rolled through when admitted. The same hallway Buddy had followed her through without hesitation. A knot formed in her chest. She shut the screen and leaned back in her chair. It wasn't random. Buddy hadn't wandered into her life by accident. He'd come back to the last place he'd seen his person. And now he was waiting faithfully, quietly, night after night, just in case the man he loved might come walking out of that door one more time. Only he wouldn't. But maybe, Emily thought, maybe someone could help him understand that, or at least stay with him until he was ready to let go. The next morning, long after Buddy had settled once again into his quiet post by the door, Emily sat alone in the clinic's small break room, turning a lukewarm cup of coffee in her hands. The snow outside was thick, muting the world beyond the frosted windows. But inside, her thoughts swirled with noise. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Buddy had gone straight to that corner. The same spot where Hank Reynolds had laid during his final days. The exact spot. Coincidence? Her gut told her otherwise. She logged back into the clinic's patient database, fingers moving instinctively over the keys. Searching Hank Reynolds. The screen flickered, and then there he was. The intake photo showed a kind-eyed older man with a sun-weathered face and a fading smile. His chart listed him as 71 years old, diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer, no next of kin, former occupation, firefighter. Emily leaned back, exhaling softly. So he had been a fireman. Scrolling further through the intake notes, she found a brief entry by one of the night nurses. Patient requested a room facing rear parking lot. Reason unclear. That same back entrance. The one Buddy waited at every night. She glanced out the window. He was there again. His black coat stood out against the endless white snow, his frame still and focused. That dog wasn't wandering. He wasn't confused or lost. He was following a pattern that had meaning. Emily closed the file and made a decision. She grabbed her coat, her keys, and a notebook, then headed out into the cold, not toward her car, but toward Pine Hollow's small fire station, just a few blocks from the clinic. The air burned against her cheeks as she walked. The wind had picked up, but the town was quiet, tucked under a blanket of winter. She hadn't been to the station in years, not since volunteering during a local fundraiser, but she remembered the chief, a friendly man named Paul Stetson. Sure enough, Paul was there, hunched over a steaming mug of coffee near the front desk when she arrived. He blinked when he saw her. "Emily Dawson," he greeted warmly. "Long time. You still at the vet clinic?" She nodded. "I need to ask you something. About one of your old guys. Hank Reynolds." Paul's face softened immediately. "Hank. Yeah. We lost him last month. Hell of a guy. Retired long before you moved here, but he'd drop by now and then. Always brought donuts. Always had a story. Did he have a dog?" Emily asked. Paul chuckled. "You mean Buddy?" "Of course. Big black Pitbull. never left Hank's side. Most loyal animal I've ever seen. The two of them used to walk the perimeter trails out by the edge of town almost every morning. People said they looked like a pair of old soldiers. Emily's heart gave a soft squeeze. She explained what had been happening, Buddy showing up night after night, sitting outside the clinic, not moving, not leaving. She told Paul about the snow, the silence, the way he'd laid in Hank's old corner like he knew exactly where to go. Paul grew quiet. "Damn," he said after a long moment. "That dog loved him. We all knew it. But I didn't know he'd found his way back there." Did Hank ever talk about what would happen to Buddy after? Paul nodded slowly. He did. Said he was worried. Not about death itself, but about leaving Buddy behind. I remember him saying, "If I can't stick around to help people anymore, maybe Buddy can do it for me." Thought that dog had a calling. Emily felt a strange mix of warmth and ache at those words. Was Buddy trained? I mean, formally. Paul nodded. Hank started training himself. He wasn't certified, but that dog was smart, obedient, calm under pressure. Last year, during that cabin fire out on Timber Ridge, Buddy was the one who ran back inside and let a little girl out. The family didn't know his name. They just called him the Angel Dog. Hank never told anyone it was him. Didn't want attention. Emily's breath caught. She remembered that fire. It had been all over the local paper. The little girl had suffered only minor injuries, and no one had known where the dog had come from. All this time, it had been Buddy. Her fingers tightened around her notebook. So Hank meant it. He really believed Buddy could carry on his work. Paul nodded again. Said it every time we talked. That dog's got more courage than most men I've known. When I go, he'll still be out there doing what he was made to do. The words echoed in her chest long after she left the station. Back at the clinic, she found herself watching Buddy again. But now she didn't see a lost stray. She saw a partner in grief, a soldier without his captain, a promise unfulfilled. She knelt near the glass door and whispered, "You saved a little girl, didn't you? You helped him help others. And now you don't know what to do without him." Buddy didn't turn, but his tail moved slightly. One slow thump against the snow. Emily wiped at the corner of her eye. Not because she was sad, exactly, but because something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like she was feeding a stray dog. She felt like she'd stepped into a legacy that had been waiting for someone to notice, for someone to carry it forward. And somehow, across the silence of a snow-covered town, through the heart of a dog that had never forgotten, she heard the quiet echo of Hank's voice. He'll keep helping people, even when I'm gone. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Emily to help Buddy do just that. It was a Sunday morning when Emily decided to visit the cemetery. The clinic was closed for maintenance. The snow had eased into a quiet dusting, and something inside her, something unspoken, nudged her toward the resting place of her father. It had been over 2 years since he passed, but she still found comfort walking the narrow rows between the old headstones, where silence hung like prayer and memories breathed softly in the winter air. Her father, George Dawson, had been a World War II veteran, a man of few words, upright posture, and a steel heart softened only by the presence of animals, especially dogs. As a child, Emily remembered the way he used to sit for hours on the porch with their old retriever, Whiskey, by his side. When he died, she buried his favorite dog tag beneath his stone. That morning, as she made her way toward his grave near the edge of Pine Hollow Cemetery, something unexpected caught her eye. A small bouquet of pine branches and dried lavender rested on a nearby headstone, simple but thoughtful. The name on the marker read, Hank Reynolds. Emily froze. She hadn't known where Hank was buried. She hadn't even thought to ask. But here he was, laid to rest not 20 feet from her father. She stared at the name for a long moment, letting it settle in. The man whose dog now sat, watch outside her clinic. The man who had whispered his last goodbyes in a room she walked through every night. The man who believed his dog had a purpose beyond his own passing. She turned toward her father's grave and felt something stir. A whisper of a memory, something about a fire, a story her dad had told her when she was a teenager, but had never repeated. It had been early spring. She'd come home from school to find him sitting unusually quiet, his face pale. That night at dinner, He'd told her he'd nearly died in a fire during his early years working in logistics. A building collapse, smoke and metal and pain. And then someone had pulled him out. A young firefighter who'd gone back inside despite orders not to. Emily had thought it was just another war story, something heroic and blurry from long ago. But now, standing between two graves that seemed impossibly close, the weight of something unsaid pressed in on her. Could it be? Could Hank have been the man who saved her father? Later that afternoon, unable to shake the feeling, she returned to the firehouse. Paul Stetson greeted her again, this time with a curious glance. "Back so soon?" Emily stepped in, brushing snow from her sleeves. "I have a strange question," she said. "Did Hank Reynolds ever respond to a warehouse fire about 40 years ago on the east side of town? Logistics depot." Paul furrowed his brow. "You know, he did. It was his first big rescue. I've heard him tell it a few times. Building was about to collapse. Everyone else was pulled out, but Hank ran back in because he swore he heard someone calling. Turned out he was right. Pulled the guy out just before the floor gave way. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. Why?" Emily's voice trembled. "That man was my dad." The silence that followed felt sacred. For a long moment, Paul said nothing. Then, gently, "Guess that makes what's happening now a little more than coincidence." Emily nodded, her throat tight. It wasn't just kindness that had drawn her to Buddy. It was something deeper, a connection forged long before she understood it, a debt owed in silence. And now, somehow, it had come full circle. That night, as the sky darkened over Pine Hollow and snow once again began to fall, Emily unlocked a small cabinet at the back of the clinic. It had belonged to Hank during his final days, a place to keep his few personal items. Among the items, a faded flannel shirt, a pair of glasses, and a small digital recorder. Curious, Emily pressed play. At first only static. Then a voice gravelly, warm, unmistakably Hank's. "Hey buddy," he said softly. "It's late. You're probably curled up under the porch again. Just wanted to talk for a minute. Don't know how much longer I've got." Emily's breath hitched. Buddy, lying nearby, lifted his head. "I don't want you to be scared when I don't come back. I hope someone good finds you. You've got more heart than most people. You were never just a dog to me. You were my partner, and if you're out there, somewhere, watching, I hope you know you were loved." The moment stretched, raw and unfiltered. Buddy rose slowly, padding toward the speaker. Emily watched as his body stiffened, then softened. He lowered his head gently beside the recorder, tail thumping once. A low, soft sound escaped his throat, not a whimper, not a bark, but something in between. A sound made of recognition and grief. Emily knelt beside him, unable to hold back the tears. Not because of sadness alone, but because something sacred had just passed between them. A message carried through time, from a man who'd once saved her father, to a dog now saving her heart. The past had found its way back, and the circle was closing. For the next few nights, Emily found herself lingering at the clinic long after her shift had ended. Buddy had stopped waiting by the door. After that moment, with the recorder, after hearing Hank's voice again, he'd started sleeping inside, near the bench in the hallway where he'd once laid quietly through storms. He still didn't bark or demand attention, but there was a softness in him now. He would follow Emily with his eyes, sometimes rise and sit near her while she worked late. He was present in a way that felt deliberate, gentle, grateful, and that, more than anything, made it harder, because Emily knew what she had to do, and she didn't want to. Each evening, she found herself caught between two truths. One, that Buddy had been meant for something more, trained by Hank, not just as a companion, but as a helper, a healer, a dog with a calling. The other, that Emily had begun to love him, not just as a patient or a rescue, but as a companion in her own quiet grief, a presence that filled the spaces her father used to occupy, a gentle soul who, without words, understood the weight of missing someone. More than once, she caught herself imagining him staying with her for good, walking home together, sharing quiet dinners, waiting by the front door when she came home. A simple life, maybe a healing one for both of them. But then she'd remember what Hank had said. If I can't help people anymore, Buddy will. Those words echoed in her chest like a promise that wasn't hers but had somehow become her burden to honor. She began researching local veteran recovery centers. After 3 days of searching emails and phone calls, she found it, a small but well-respected facility just outside Bend, Oregon. They offered treatment programs for PTSD, addiction, and trauma recovery, and had recently started incorporating animal-assisted therapy. The timing felt almost designed. The intake coordinator, a woman named Denise, was patient and kind. She listened to Emily's story about Hank, about Buddy, about the nights of snow and silence, and responded with something Emily didn't expect. "We've had a few dogs come through here," Denise said over the phone, "but we've never had one with a story like this. If what you're telling me is true, Buddy may be just the dog some of our veterans need. We'd be honored to meet him." Emily hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her kitchen, staring at the pale yellow wallpaper that had curled at the edges since her father passed. Her fingers trembled slightly. The decision was made, but it didn't feel like victory. That night, she sat beside Buddy on the hallway bench, her shoulder brushing against his. The lights were low, the building quiet except for the distant hum of the HVAC. "I'm going to miss you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Buddy shifted, resting his head gently on her thigh. A simple gesture, a goodbye not spoken, but understood. In the days that followed, she prepared carefully. A health check, updated vaccinations, a custom name tag engraved with both his name and hers, just in case. She packed a small bag with his blanket, a favorite chew toy, and though she didn't admit it out loud, the recorder with Hank's voice. She told no one else. Not yet. This moment, this choice, was personal. On the morning of his transfer, the sky was bright but cold. A light frost clung to the sidewalks. Denise arrived in a quiet SUV with the center's handler, a soft-spoken man named Micah who had the calm, steady air of someone who had walked through his own storms. Buddy approached them without hesitation. No growl, no tail between legs. Just that same quiet confidence. The same presence he'd shown at the clinic. "He's different," Micah said after a moment. "He watches people. Not just with curiosity, but like he's listening." Emily smiled through the lump in her throat. "He always does." She knelt to say goodbye. Buddy stood still as she tied his leash, pressing his head gently against her chest. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, her voice breaking. And so is he. She didn't have to say who he was. Buddy knew. And when Micah opened the back of the SUV and motioned for him to climb in, Buddy turned back only once, just long enough for their eyes to meet. Then he stepped inside, and the door closed. Emily stood in the cold, long after the vehicle pulled away. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because it wasn't a loss. It was a release, a choice not of goodbye, but of go on, because she understood now what love really meant. Love wasn't always staying. Sometimes it was letting go, letting someone fulfill the purpose they were born for. As the frost melted beneath her boots and the sun began to rise over Pine Hollow, Emily walked back into the clinic. The hallway felt emptier, quieter, but also lighter. She wasn't alone. Not really. Somewhere down the road, a dog named Buddy was about to change someone's life, just like he had changed hers. The Veteran Center sat quietly beneath a ridge of pine trees, just outside Bend, Oregon. It was simple weathered stone buildings, quiet gardens, winding gravel paths, but there was a kind of hush to the place that didn't feel empty. It felt careful, like the air itself understood how to tread softly. Buddy arrived just after sunrise, his black coat gleaming under the cold light. He'd ridden silently the entire drive, ears perked, body calm. Micah, the handler, had noted how quickly he adjusted to the new surroundings. No signs of panic, no pacing, just a kind of quiet awareness, as if Buddy already sensed he was meant to be there. Inside the main recovery wing, rooms branched off from a central common area. Most of the residents were men and women who had served, some still walking with the weight of battles they didn't talk about. Some had been there for months, others only days. And one of them was Logan Meyer. He was 32 years old, former infantry, Afghanistan. Since arriving at the center 6 months ago, Logan had barely spoken. He participated in no group sessions, ate alone, slept in short, fragmented stretches, if at all. Night terrors came often, and when they did, they were violent. Staff had tried medication, therapy dogs, even soft music. Nothing reached him. So when Buddy arrived, no one expected anything to change. That afternoon, Logan was seated on the edge of a couch in the common room, staring at the wall. His hoodie was pulled tight around his shoulders, one knee bouncing slightly, eyes locked on nothing. Buddy entered without fanfare, his leash loose in Micah's hand. He didn't hesitate. He didn't sniff the room or pace the walls. He walked directly and without pause toward Logan. Some of the staff stood, ready to intervene if needed. But Micah lifted a hand. "Let him go," he said quietly. Buddy approached and stopped only inches from Logan's boots. He looked up once, then lowered himself gently to the floor, laying his head across Logan's shoes. Logan didn't move. Not at first. But then, slowly, he looked down, and something in his chest cracked open. His hands, so often clenched into fists, now trembled against his knees. His shoulders shook once. Then, again, his eyes welled with a kind of grief that couldn't be measured in words. And then, in a voice that hadn't been heard in months, he whispered, "You know me?" Buddy didn't move. Just a soft thump of his tail against the floor. Logan leaned forward, one hand hovering awkwardly in the air before resting gently on Buddy's head. "I don't know how," he said, voice breaking, "but you feel like home." That night, Logan didn't scream. He didn't pace. He didn't call out names of lost brothers in his sleep. He slept. All the way through. 8 full hours. When the staff gathered in the morning and found him still resting, with Buddy curled up at the foot of his bed, they didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Something sacred had happened. Buddy had found the person he'd been waiting to help. Not because someone told him to. Not because it was part of a training protocol, but because that's what his heart told him to do. 3 days later, a package arrived at the clinic in Pine Hollow. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter was handwritten, ink slightly smudged in places, as if the writer had struggled with what to say. Emily unfolded it carefully and read, "Dear Emily, I don't know where to begin. I guess I'll start with thank you. When Buddy walked into this center, none of us knew what to expect. But from the moment he laid down at Logan's feet, everything shifted. We've been trying to reach that young man for half a year. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat properly, wouldn't sleep. And then Buddy walked in, and it was like a door unlocked inside him. They haven't left each other's side since. Logan talks now. He laughs sometimes. He walks Buddy through the garden every morning, like it's part of some quiet ritual. I don't know what it is about that dog. Maybe it's Hank's spirit. Maybe it's just something unexplainable. But it's real, and it's healing someone who'd almost given up. Attached is a photo we took yesterday. Thought you might like to see what love in action looks like. With deep gratitude, Denise M., Veteran Wellness Coordinator. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the photo. It was taken in soft afternoon light. Logan sat on a bench beneath a tree, eyes closed, Buddy's head resting in his lap. Their bodies leaned together like two pieces of something broken, finally made whole. Neither was smiling, but the peace on their faces said more than joy ever could. Emily stared at the photo for a long time. She thought about Hank. She thought about the snowy nights, the quiet watches, the waiting. She thought about Buddy, and how in the end he hadn't needed anyone to give him purpose. He had found it on his own, because the truth was simple. Some hearts don't need words. They just need a place to belong. And Buddy, loyal, steady, grieving, and brave, had finally found his. Winter gave way slowly that year. By late February, the snow in Pine Hollow had begun to melt in uneven patches, revealing tufts of brown grass and damp earth beneath. The trees still stood bare, but there was a different kind of stillness now. Not the cold kind, not the waiting kind, but the kind that comes when something important has finally settled into its rightful place. At the vet clinic, the days were picking up. Spring was always busy with new litters, annual checkups, and the usual wildlife incidents that came with thawed trails and curious hikers. But Emily Dawson found herself walking a little slower through the halls these days, not because she was tired, but because she was thoughtful. Something had shifted in her. Something had opened and closed all at once. On the corner of her desk, in a smooth wooden frame, sat a photograph she had come to treasure more than anything. In it, a young man with deep, quiet eyes sat on a bench beneath a pine tree, his head tilted gently down. Resting in his lap was a large black Pitbull, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Their bodies leaned together, soft with trust, with healing. Logan and Buddy. Underneath the photo, carefully inscribed in a simple brass plate, were the words, "Some hearts never stop giving." Emily had chosen the phrase after hours of sitting in silence, searching for something that could explain what this journey had been. Those 5 words had risen like breath from a still lake. Because Hank had given, because her father had given, because Buddy, quiet, steadfast Buddy, had never stopped. Every time she looked at that photo, she felt the fullness of that truth. And so, on the first clear Sunday of March, Emily returned to the cemetery. A soft wind played through the dry pine needles as she walked the familiar path between the gravestones. The sun was still low, casting a golden sheen across the snow that lingered stubbornly in the shaded spots. She carried with her 2 small bundles of daffodils, her father's favorite flower, and a scarf Buddy had once napped on, now folded neatly in her coat pocket. She stopped first at her father's grave. The stone was simple, weather-worn, but strong. She brushed off the frost with her glove, crouched down, and rested the flowers gently beneath the engraved name, George Dawson. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, a smile tugging faintly at her lips. "I wanted you to know. I met the man who saved you. His name was Hank. He passed away last winter, but his dog Buddy, he found me. And I think you would have loved him." She lingered a moment longer, letting the wind carry her words. Then, turning slightly to her right, she walked the few short steps to the second grave, the one she'd stood beside not so long ago when the mystery had just begun. Hank Reynolds. Emily knelt again, this time with deeper ease. She unfolded the scarf, smoothing it gently across the base of the marker. It fluttered slightly in the breeze, the faint scent of cedar and dog fur still clinging to it. Then she placed the second bundle of daffodils just above it, her fingers trembling slightly with the tenderness of the gesture. "I kept my promise," she said softly, voice catching. "Buddy found someone who needed him, and he's good at it. Really good. You were right about him. He wasn't done giving." She paused, then added quietly, "Neither were you." For a long time, she sat there between the 2 stones, between 2 generations of men who had, each in their own way, taught her that love didn't end where life did. That purpose had echoes, that some things lived on because we made room for them to continue. When she finally rose to leave, the sun had lifted just high enough to warm her shoulders. The snow sparkled in its light. The wind was still cold, but not biting anymore. As she walked down the trail leading out of the cemetery, Emily turned once to look back. 2 small bundles of yellow daffodils nestled against gray stone, a scarf lifting gently in the breeze. It was enough. Back at the clinic, she received updates every week from the center. Denise wrote often, sometimes with short stories, Buddy waiting outside the art room for Logan to finish painting, or refusing to leave his side during a particularly hard therapy session. Micah sent photos, Buddy leading walks through the woods, curled up in front of the fireplace, nestled into the crook of a new veteran's leg. But the last update had arrived just 2 days before her visit to the cemetery. It had been a video. In it, Logan stood in the therapy garden, speaking to a small group. His voice was steady, his hands no longer shaking. He was telling them about fear, about war, about silence. And then he said, "There's this dog. His name's Buddy. And I think he waited for me before I even knew I needed someone. I used to think I didn't deserve peace. But every night he lays beside me, I remember I do." Emily had watched the video twice. Then she saved it on her phone. That night, she dreamed of her father again. He was sitting on their old porch, just like he used to, the fading afternoon light casting shadows across the steps. Next to him, instead of whiskey, sat Buddy, older now, maybe, or just wiser. Her father looked over at her and nodded once, his eyes warm. She woke with tears in her eyes and peace in her chest. Buddy no longer sat at the door of the clinic. He no longer waited in the snow. He ran now, through forests of pine and quiet hope, not as the one left behind, but as the one who walked forward, who healed, who carried with him the weight of memory, the grace of loyalty, and the quiet power of a heart that had never stopped giving. And somewhere, in a place where names are remembered not just in stone but in action, a young man sat beside a black Pitbull, no longer broken, no longer lost, just home. And so, the black Pitbull, who once sat silently in the snow, no longer waits. He heals. Because one man believed in him, and one woman chose to carry that belief forward. This is not just a story about a dog. It's a story about love that endures, promises kept, and hearts that never stop giving. Like Fred Rogers once said, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if Buddy had waited at your door? Subscribe now and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support is what fuels this channel to create more meaningful, heartfelt stories. This video holds a message deeper than words, so make sure you watched till the end. Because sometimes, the ending is the beginning.